Story at 6.
From around the world and from CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. And tonight, a special report, the inside story of America's attempt at an anti-Iranian coup.
Good evening. President Reagan had to spend time again today trying to end feuding within his official family. But as he was doing so, his two top cabinet members were caught in contradictions over nuclear strategy. Bill Plant and Robert Pierpoint report from Washington.
It is something Ronald Reagan almost never does and doesn't like to do. But today, in an attempt to calm the infighting in his Foreign Policy Command, he met personally with his Secretary of State and his National Security Advisor. A White House spokesman described the session as a friendly conversation in which the president told Haig and Allen that he wanted to ensure that the matters of the past 2 days are closed. Mr. Reagan also discussed, according to the spokesman, ways to make the foreign policy apparatus of the government work better and ways to stop any internal criticisms. No one else was present at the one-hour meeting. The White House claims the session was not a reprimand of either man and that the president did not threaten to fire either of them. But Mr. Reagan and his top advisors were known to be extremely upset over recent stories quoting the Secretary of State as saying that there is a guerrilla campaign in the West Wing to discredit him. Following the meeting, Allen continued to deny that he was the source of the anti-Haig feeling in the White House.
I think this ought clearly to lay those rumors to rest. Rumors they were, and rumors they shall be buried.
Top White House aides insist that the matter is now closed, that both Haig and Allen will keep their jobs. But at the same time, they were stunned by Haig's reference to a nuclear warning shot, and then by Defense Secretary Weinberger's apparent contradiction. We hadn't gotten over the Haig-Allen business yet, said one. It'll never stop, said another, until one of them goes. Bill Plant, CBS News, the White House.
Just before Defense Secretary Weinberger appeared at a Senate hearing today, he had met with Secretary of State Haig, presumably to settle still another Haig controversy. But at the hearing itself, Weinberger seemed to contradict Haig's statement yesterday that NATO has contingency plans for firing a nuclear weapon, quote, to demonstrate to the other side that they are exceeding the limits of toleration in the conventional area.
This was a suggestion, as I understand it, in the 60s of one of the military planners, and indeed Secretary Haig reported it as a suggestion that had been made at that time. But there is absolutely nothing in any of the plans with which I am familiar that contains anything remotely resembling this, nor should it.
Reporters tried the rest of today to talk to Haig, but the Secretary of State was uncharacteristically unavailable to explain his apparent difference with Weinberger. Late today, the Pentagon issued a statement which claimed both secretaries are correct. It explains that Haig is correct in saying a nuclear weapon demonstration firing as a warning was an option discussed in NATO several years ago. But it goes on to say that the military never translated this option into a plan, meaning apparently that the experts never quite figured out how you can fire off a nuclear weapon in Europe without starting a nuclear war. Through all these hazy words, one thing seems clear. Given Europe's current allergy to talk of nuclear weapons, both secretaries now wish Haig had not said it. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News at the State Department.
Sweden's prime minister said today that in all probability there are nuclear warheads aboard that Soviet submarine that ran aground in Swedish waters. Doug Tennell has more on the sub-saga from Stockholm.
A series of tests while the submarine was still aground had detected substantial traces of uranium-238 from one of the torpedo tubes. It is an isotope used in nuclear weapons. The Swedish government asked the Soviets if the sub was carrying nuclear warheads, only to receive an oblique reply. All Soviet submarines at sea are sufficiently equipped, the Soviets said, and so tonight, Prime Minister Thorbjörn Fälldin made public his analyst's conclusion. The sub is probably armed with nuclear torpedoes, Fälldin said. Swedish naval commanders had previously not suspected that even an aging Whiskey-class submarine assigned to the Soviets' Baltic Fleet carried such a lethal device. The discovery explained in part what Swedish officers called a continuous buildup of Soviet naval strength in the last 48 hours just outside Sweden's 12-mile limit. A Soviet vice admiral on board a Kashin-class destroyer is to take custody of the submarine once the Swedish Navy carries out the order to tow the vessel out to sea. But high winds tonight delayed the operation, Swedish officials say. Now they are taking no chances. The sub ran aground on a day when the Swedish Navy had been testing a new anti-submarine device in the area. But beyond that, little else is known about why it ventured into a military zone deep inside Swedish territorial waters, armed with what the experts suspect are nuclear weapons. Doug Tinnell, CBS News, at the Karlskrona Naval Base, Sweden.
Jordanian King Hussein's decision to purchase a missile system from the Soviet Union caught the Reagan administration by surprise. Bob Simon at the State Department explains why.
CBS News has learned that U.S. officials now admit there was an intelligence failure preceding Hussein's arrival in Washington. Neither the State Department nor the Pentagon had any idea that his arms deal with Moscow had already been signed and sealed. The king made it clear before leaving Washington today that he'd gone to the Russians for SAM-6 missiles because he couldn't get what he needed from Washington.
The United States had closed its doors in our face for a period of time, particularly in Jordan. And this is something we regretted. And I don't know what the future will bring, but I hope that this will not remain the case.
A senior administration official said this afternoon that the king's purchase of Soviet weapons will clearly complicate his arms relationship with the United States. This is probably the understatement of the day, meaning at the very least that the king's chances of getting the F-16 fighter planes he wants so badly are not nearly what they were a week ago. Bob Simon, CBS News, Washington.
Recently, a few extraordinary wines were entered in a prestigious international competition. Wines made from costly varietal grapes, harvested in some of the world's finest growing regions. An oak-aged Chardonnay, a deep, full-flavored Burgundy, a light, dry Chenin Blanc, a varietal Rosé, a spicy Gewürztraminer. And each of these wines, all from a single winemaker, was judged to be among the best of the world.
Silver medal, gold medal, silver, gold, gold medal.
The wines, all from America, all from California, and all from the wine cellars of America's premier vintners, Ernest and Julio Gallo. The award-winning wines of Ernest and Julio Gallo.
It's estimated that well over 1 million American children run away from home every year. One of them testified today before a Senate subcommittee. He represented, as George Herman reports, what's being called a national epidemic of child tragedies.
A boy named David told the subcommittee he'd been sexually molested by family friends at age 7, began using drugs at 12, ran away from home to be a hustler at 15.
A hustler's a male young man that goes out on the streets and sells his body to, most of the time, I say 9 out of 10 times, older men or men for profit.
What's the most money you've made for a trick, as you put it?
About $45.
And how many tricks can you turn a night?
If it's a good night, 2 or 3.
David is now off of drugs and in rehabilitation. But Terry Sullivan, who prosecuted John Gacy for the murder of 33 boys in Chicago, says David is part of a lucky minority. Sullivan charges that the juvenile justice system has broken down, is unable to deal with youngsters drifting into crime.
The only place that we can stop these juveniles from becoming adult criminals is to stop them at the point where they get into the system, where they have their first contact with the system.
Father Bruce Ritter runs Covenant House, a home for runaways near Times Square in New York. He says he can rehabilitate only about a third of those who come to him, that hundreds will be degraded, tortured, even killed by their elders.
We have decided in our society quite clearly that sex is entertainment, and that it is okay to pay the entertainers, even, God help us, when they are children.
Well, if you were to give some advice to another young man who was 12 years old, young boy who was 12 years old, on how to avoid the terrible things that have happened to you, what would you say to him?
Stay home and stay a boy for as long as you can. Don't grow up too quick.
But the experts see no sign the flood of runaways will diminish. George Herman, CBS News, Washington.
The National Coalition for Children's Justice estimates 4,000 of those young American runaways are killed every year. A continent away from Washington, a jury heard about some of those young victims. David Dow was there.
In a city that has had its share of bizarre crime sprees, the case of the so-called freeway killer is one of the grisliest. The name coming from the locations where many of the victims were found. All were young white men or boys who disappeared and were later found dead, and in many cases tortured and raped. William Bonin, a 34-year-old truck driver and convicted sex offender, is accused of 12 such murders, though prosecutors in the televised trial have asserted he killed others.
We will indeed prove in this courtroom that he is the freeway killer, as he has bragged to a number of witnesses. Bragged that he has killed in excess of 16 young men and boys in that system.
And I must warn you now and admonish you that every single thing that the district attorney said this morning is not evidence, and you cannot consider it as evidence.
With pictures of the victims on display, the prosecution has called parents and friends to testify.
After you talked to Darren that day, did you ever see or hear from your son again?
No, sir.
Do you recognize that as being the body of your son?
Yes, sir.
2 days after Patricia Kendrick's son, Darren, 19, disappeared from a supermarket parking lot, his nude body was found in an industrial park. He'd been stabbed through the ear with an ice pick. The defense has asserted there are inconsistencies in the various accounts of some of these crimes. 2 other men have already been convicted of being accomplices in 3 of the freeway murders. They will likely testify in this trial, which may last several months. David Dow, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Charges were dropped today against the woman who was arrested in a massive raid on a Mississippi farmhouse last month and linked to that fatal armored car holdup in suburban New York. Authorities say the FBI has determined that black separatist Cynthia Boston was in New Orleans on October 21st, the date witnesses had placed her at a so-called safe house near New York City. New York's Chemical Bank, the 6th largest in the nation, today dropped its prime lending rate 1/2 percentage point to 17%. This move reflects the lowered cost of acquiring funds by banks. Other banks held their primes at 17.5%, but analysts predicted an industry-wide move to the lower rate within days. Commerce Secretary Malcolm Baldrige today promised senators from the nation's steel belt states some protective armor for their economically depressed industry. 6 cases to be filed against foreign steelmakers that are undercutting American steel by selling at unfairly low prices on the American market. Baldrige didn't name the foreign firms to be sued. He said their embassies were being notified first.
When I found out how affordable Michelin radios were, I thought they were putting me on. Well, as it turns out, I'm putting them on.
I came in here expecting only to have enough for my second choice, but he put me on to Michelin for about the same price.
If anyone tells you Michelin quality is too expensive, they're putting you on. Price Michelins. Only our standards are high.
I found out Michelin prices are really competitive. So that's what I'm putting on.
Michelin. We put America on radios.
Morning, Pam. Maxwell House Master Blend coffee?
It's the ground coffee that can save us money.
Well, saves money, fine, but how does it taste? That means it tastes like Maxwell House.
Maxwell House Master Blend. 100% pure ground coffee. Not concentrated, not flaked. We make it a special way so you can save money.
Great coffee.
I know.
Maxwell House Master Blend. Great tasting coffee that can save you money.
Citing too much cost and not enough benefit to consumers, the Treasury Department today rejected a proposal requiring ingredient labels on alcoholic beverages. Some consumer groups aren't drinking to that. They say people have a right to positive proof of just what's in their favorite brew. The contestants, hundreds and hundreds. The judges, just 5 fielded for the government. And as Bruce Morton reports, when it was all over today, all but one of the entries were lame ducks.
This is a story about ducks and pictures of ducks and big money. Inside the Interior Department, they had about 2,000 pictures of ducks and other waterfowl. The winning picture will be used on the government's duck stamp. Hunters must buy the $7.50 stamp. It will raise $16 million for the government this year, and the money goes for buying and preserving wetlands where the waterfowl live. But these are such ducks as dreams are made on. Dreams and fortunes. That's because the winning drawing is also turned into a limited edition print. Dealer Bill Webster sold an edition of 16,000 prints last year. How much did the artist make?
It would be in excess of $500,000.
So last year's winner, John Wilson of Watertown, South Dakota, was able to quit his job designing and painting signs.
So after 25 years of punching the clock every day, and then suddenly you didn't have to punch the clock, it was quite a change.
The early judging, in or out like Romans and gladiators, was brisk. Realism was in, abstraction out. The 5 judges from conservation groups, not art galleries, took more time as the field narrowed. And finally,
in first place, Canvasback's David Moss.
51-year-old Moss is from Waterville, Minnesota, a professional artist who hit the jackpot once before in 1973. He knows the moral is, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it may be serious money. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
Of all the breakfast cereals on the market today, over 100 of them altogether, only a very few are high nutrition cereals. New Buckwheats is one of them. And among the high nutrition cereals, only Buckwheats has a great new touch of honey taste.
Mmm, nice touch.
So, for high nutrition and great taste, New Buckwheats, the only high nutrition cereal with a touch of honey taste.
The only serious solution to indoor air pollution. Ecologizer CA90 air treatment systems. The unique CA90 natural cleansing system is scientifically superior to anything else. It removes tobacco smoke, odors, dust and pollen from the air continuously. Ecologizer CA90 air treatment systems for home, office, and auto. Anything else is less.
Officials said today that the delayed second launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia will take place no sooner than Wednesday and could be pushed back to the following week. Yesterday's launch attempt was scrubbed just seconds before liftoff when 2 filters clogged in the power units. If those units can be cleaned, Space Agency spokesman said the earlier launch date will be met. But if the units must be replaced, liftoff would be delayed until the following week. A decision is expected Saturday. University of Maryland researchers said today that a hormonal imbalance found in crib death victims may lead to a test that could save infants suffering from the disease, which kills 7,000 U.S. babies a year. They call that the first solid psychological trait, I should say the first solid physiological trait, linking victims of sudden infant death syndrome. Significantly higher levels of the hormone called T3 were found in 44 of 50 Maryland SID victims, according to a study in Pediatrics magazine. T3 can be detected with a simple blood test and controlled with drugs, but doctors say more research is still needed before a screening test can be devised. The capture of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and the hostage ordeal that followed were a nightmare that most Americans have put behind them. But 2 years and a day after it all began, and almost 10 months after it ended, there remain many questions. Among them, could the events that unfolded in Tehran have been prevented? One person raising that question is retired U.S. Army General Robert Heiser, who was a key player in the Iran drama, and who for the first time has talked publicly about that time in Tehran with CBS News. Liz Trotta has our report.
January 4th, 1979, 10 months before the fall of the American embassy. The Shah was still in Iran, and the United States was trying desperately to salvage its interests. In France, the Ayatollah Khomeini was waiting. Against this background, a United States 4-star general arrived in Tehran, carrying written orders from President Carter. He was General Robert Dutch Heiser. Heiser was no stranger to Iran and knew personally many of the top generals. His secret mission now was to wean the Iranian armed forces away from the Shah and urged them to back the newly appointed civilian government of Shapur Bakhtiar. Should that fail, Heiser was authorized to support a coup d'etat.
It was implied that should all the efforts be made that could be made to establish a civilian government and supported by the military, and should that fail, and should it be necessary for the military to take further action, that they could be assured of U.S. support. And that, of course, was logistical support as well as moral support.
Would it be wrong of me to infer, then, that in your mind, you knew that if push came to shove in Iran, you would have American support for a military coup d'etat?
I had that opinion, yes.
This approach was not shared by William Sullivan, the American ambassador to Iran. Sullivan's recommendation to Washington was that the United States work out an accommodation with the Khomeini forces. He felt Heiser's orders for a military takeover would only lead to failure.
I certainly said that I thought that this was not a feasible course of operation, tried to get that set of orders reversed.
Each night during Heiser's 30-day visit, the two men, standing no more than 5 feet apart in the embassy compound, would report by telephone to their separate superiors in Washington. Heiser reported to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General David Jones, Defense Secretary Harold Brown, and National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. Sullivan reported to Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and Undersecretary of State David Newsom. Heiser was getting specific instructions from Defense for a military solution, while Sullivan was receiving encouragement from State on his plan to deal with the revolutionaries. We're both talking about two entirely different ways to solve America's problems in Iran.
And then we would walk back across the compound of the house and come to the conclusion we'd been talking to two different cities.
According to Heiser, it was Brzezinski who pushed harder for the military option, the so-called Iron Fist approach.
General Heiser was not in charge of the Iranian military. He was there to offer them advice, to encourage them, to hold them together, to get them ready to act when the right moment came and when they had the will to act.
To ensure they would have the will to act, Heiser asked Washington to provide warm clothing for the Iranian troops, and he got it. He also needed fuel for the Iranian armed forces, and so Washington sent a tanker, although it never made it into port. More important, Heiser told CBS News that with the approval of Washington, he was able to assure the Iranians the United States would take care of any external threat from the Soviet Union. Violence in the streets of Tehran was now becoming commonplace, only further thwarting any efforts to inspire the armed forces. Meanwhile, the Shah had left the country, and Heiser and Sullivan were still pursuing opposite solutions. Heiser left Iran on February 4th, just 3 days after the Ayatollah Khomeini made his triumphant entry into Iran. On February 6th, Heiser reported to President Carter and members of his cabinet, telling them he had reservations about whether the Iranian armed forces would hold. 3 days after Heiser made this report to the president, the Iranian armed forces collapsed, with many units going over to the Khomeini camp. President Carter has refused a request by CBS News to comment on the Heiser mission. Did Heiser sense total confusion in the White House?
No, I would think that would be an overstatement of how I felt. But I personally would have thought we could have become more heavily involved. And then the question in my mind about the lack of unity on the part of what we, the United States, were doing vis-a-vis Ambassador Sullivan, General Dutch Heiser.
Ambassador Sullivan remained in Tehran only to be taken hostage on February 14th when the militants seized the embassy for 1 day. Sullivan warned Washington the revolutionaries would try again and eventually resigned. His warning turned out to be a prophecy when on November 4th, 1979, 10 months from the day when General Heiser arrived in Iran, the American embassy fell again, this time for good. Liz Trotta, CBS News, New York.
In each precious drop of oil of Olay lie the origins of younger-looking skin, fluids similar to those you had so much of once before. As you get older, time weaves itself into your skin, disturbing its youthful balance. But Oil of Olay penetrates quickly, easing dryness and tiny lines, so a softer, younger look seems to come from within. Discover the secret of Oil of Olay. It can help you look younger, too.
Tonight's your anniversary.
That it is.
I see you're taking the Buick Skylark.
Indeed.
Very appropriate, rich styling, elegant interior.
Nothing but the best.
The Skylark seems to set a certain tone for the occasion.
Undoubtedly.
I gather that Skylark's economy also has its appeal.
It does, if you'd rather spend your money on better things than gasoline.
Buick Skylark, the best disguised economy car in America.
Would you really rather have a Buick?
Queen Elizabeth apparently knew about it days ago, but kept her lips royally sealed. Today, Buckingham Palace released the news that Prince Charles and Lady Diana, the newlywed royal couple, will become a trio next June. Don Kladstrup reports the word of the baby on the way brought cheers on London streets and lots of action in the bookmaking shops.
Within minutes after learning that the Princess of Wales is expecting a baby, ecstatic crowds gathered to cheer the royal couple, who arrived for a luncheon at London's historic Guildhall. A proclamation from Buckingham Palace said the baby would be born next June. Inside the hall, there were resounding cheers from the guests who came to honor the prince and princess. The Queen, who was not present, was informed of the news some days ago and was said to be delighted. Just as delighted, perhaps, as Prince Charles, who spoke excitedly about the days ahead and of his wedding last July to the princess.
Neither of us will ever forget the atmosphere. It was electric, I felt. And I remember standing in my window with it wide open, just trying to remember what it was like, so that perhaps I'd be able to tell my children, which I hope I will be able to now.
News that a baby is due sparked happy reaction outside the luncheon hall, too.
Absolutely marvelous. It's wonderful. Stupendous. All them big words.
Oh, wonderful. It's quick work.
Since her fairy tale wedding to Prince Charles 3 months ago, there's been no hiding the great affection the princess has for children. Friends say she would like to have a big family. The main question now is, will it be a boy or a girl? Bookmakers here already are quoting odds. One saying 4 to 5 it'll be a boy, another giving 50 to 1 there will be twins. Don Kladstrup, CBS News, London.
That's the CBS Evening News for this Thursday. Dan Rather reporting from New York. Good night.
Come, discover stamp collecting. Come discover the America you may never get to see. Come explore your heritage. With U.S. commemorative stamps, you'll relive great moments, meet great people, and see great beauty. It's an experience you can pass along for generations. So come to the post office and discover stamp collecting with the Frederick Remington stamp.
Atlanta, here we come.
But we still have to find a home there and sell ours here.
Hey, don't worry. I'll be working hard at this end. The Century 21 agent is there with a list of colonials.
French colonials?
We're America's #1 top seller.
At Century 21, our exclusive VIP referral service can find you a home across country.
We love it.
While selling the house you're leaving, it's what you expect from #1.
Century 21.
From around the world and from CBS News headquarters in New York, this has been the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
I'm Diane Sawyer. The news doesn't stop overnight, and Charles Kuralt and I will be here to bring you up to date tomorrow and every weekday on Morning.
This is CBS.
Dr. George Nicopolis talks about his trial and about Elvis Presley coming up next on Eyewitness News.
They don't call us the inflation fighter for nothing. We shopped our newest competitor in town and compared prices on what's shown here. Their price, Hill's price. At Hill's, it costs less. We're a store that saves you money because we discount everything every day. It makes a difference. So shop Hill's and see. They don't call us the inflation fighter.